Welcome back, my friend. Tonight we cross to Eastern Anatolia and the high skirts of Ararat, where in 1883 a hull was rumoured beneath landslides and a rainbow was remembered as a hung warbow. In our present hour, 2 young researchers are missing, and a quiet network marked by a bent bow erases what it cannot own. If the truth sleeps, the Ark's oldest whisper may be buried again before dawn. I am Snorelock Holmes, your calm companion through perilous history and sleep. Before we begin, tell me in the comments which city you're listening from tonight so I can tip my hat in your direction. Now breathe, grow soft, and let me carry the weight of the mystery for you. Chapter 1. Rain taps, glass listens. Evening rain combed the museum's windows with a steady hush, patient as the turning of a page. The gallery lights were low, reflective glass catching pale halos around me as I took my time with a clay tablet under a cool spotlight. The fragment was from Nineveh, a copyist's slice of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and there in cuneiform wedges was the old flood told in a different tongue. I stood with one hand in my pocket, the other idly sketching the curve of a boat in my notebook, a simple hull shape that had lulled minds for thousands of years. Penelope, my brown and white beagle, had surrendered to the bench and to sleep. Her paws twitched as if she trotted through a field of dream scent, while the rain kept its metronome. The museum had the sound of an empty cathedral, air-conditioned and faintly peppered with sanitizer and old paper. Somewhere, an alarm diode blinked in restful green. Somewhere else, a docent yawned into a scarf. To me, this was ordinary life, quiet, thorough, a conversation with time. I listened for anomalies, as I always do. Those little stutters in the pattern are what call me. They are the taps on the pane that a detective hears when others hear only rain. The tap came as a soft knock against the gallery's side door. 2 beats, a pause, 1 beat. Not security, not museum staff. The door opened on a wedge of wet air, and a woman stepped in with the alert, contained energy of a field scientist mid-crisis. Dr. Layla Erdem, she said, closing the door behind her as she pushed back a damp hood. The rain had pricked her cheeks rosier than the wind alone. She shed a field jacket with reflective tape and set 3 objects on the low table beside the Gilgamesh case like she was laying out a hand at cards. An oilcloth-wrapped notebook the colour of tea, a small sterile sleeve holding a sliver of pitch-scented wood, and a brass transit cap, thumb-worn smooth, like a coin someone had worried for decades. Her braided hair was wet at the ends. A headlamp looped on her belt clicked against the carabiner at her side with the jitter of steady nerves. They wiped the lab servers, she said, voice low. A crate leaves cars before dawn. I glanced at the brass cap. Scratches inside caught the light, not random, intentional. And your colleagues? Missing, she said. Efe and Marika. They never checked in for their train to Tbilisi. Penelope raised her head, the soft hound blink of gentle concern, and then, deciding the world was not on fire, curled again into the warm curve of her own ribs. Let's sit, I said. You chose the right time to interrupt a quiet evening. A window seat overlooked a sculpture courtyard glazed dark by rain. We settled. I kept my voice even, my questions easy. A detective is a tuning fork. The note I hold can calm the room. Before she spoke, the door opened a second time and a woman slipped inside, breathless, cheeks bright from the run. Round tortoiseshell glasses fogged at the edges. She pulled them off and smiled apologetically. Cotton archivist gloves peeked from a cardigan pocket like a promise to handle the past carefully. Aylin Shahin, she said, smoothing stray chestnut hairs back. Archives. I brought the provenance. She held up a folded letter, paper soft and old enough to remember a sultan. Dr. Erdem placed a palm flat on the oilcloth. I kept these offline, out of any system. 2 days ago we verified something in a core, then the wipe, then the vanishing. She swallowed gently. A convoy rolls at 5:30. From cars? I asked. She nodded, toward the Aras River. And this cap? I lifted the brass transit piece, the thumb-worn ring of a late 19th century theodolite. Inside, someone had scratched numbers that looked like a riddle, 8 to 6 to 12. My finger traced them, and the metal remembered gloved hands and wind in another century. Aylin slid the letter across. Her handwriting on the envelope was neat, small. Ottoman surveyor's notebook, she said. Kars region, 1883, Ararat Highlands. The letter explains how it came to an Armenian hermitage and then to a provincial archive, and how it vanished in 1915 and reappeared after the war with a private family. I persuaded them to let me bring it to you for one night. And you brought the wood because? I asked. Layla's mouth compressed. Because at Durupınar, where the ridge looks like a hull, our team pulled a deep core. Inside one ring, a microscopic metallic inclusion, machined. Older than any machine has a right to be if the date is true. 2 labs confirmed an impossibly ancient radiocarbon context. Then the data disappeared, the core disappeared, and a man with a matte black ring bearing a bent bow symbol was seen watching the car park. The bow. A symbol curved like a rainbow, bent for war. Selim Karaka, I said softly. Private security magnate. He gives his clients a sealed room and a clean conscience. Layla looked at me with a relieved, grim recognition. Yes, she touched the brass cap. We think the numbers inside are both scripture and bearings. Then we will read them, I said. I leaned back and let the room's breath come and go. The rain was the metronome, the tablet of Gilgamesh, the witness, and the case had walked through the door itself, as cases prefer to do when they cannot abide delay. Tell me everything, from the first odd sound to the last, I said, and the night parted around her story like a curtain opening on the simplest kind of stage, a table, 3 objects, and time ticking toward dawn. Chapter 2, in which the doves whisper and the bow aims at a ridge. We sat with the oilcloth open and the notebook breathing out the faint scent of dust and leather. Layla spoke with the careful cadence of a field log. Facts first, then the dread beneath. In 2027, she began, our team ran ground-penetrating radar along the Durupınar formation. It's a boat-shaped ridge near the Ararat Highlands. Most geologists call it a natural outcrop shaped by mud flows, but some anomalies kept returning at regular intervals like ribs. The radar showed linear features in a way that nagged, so we pulled a deep core from just above a void signature. The core came up with a section of mineralized wood, dense, dark, and streaked with pitch. She nodded toward the sterile sleeve. I withdrew the sliver. It smelled like bitumen, the tar that ancient builders used to seal timbers. Under my lens, flecks of blue dust winked. Azrâk tash, the blue stone the locals call blue. Lapis? No. Closer to copper-bearing bluestone common in those soils. And in the wood's annual ring, a tiny gleam caught the light. Not a splinter of nail, not a storm's gift. This was machined. The edges were clean as a blade's honest work. We ran radiocarbon, Layla said. I knew better than to trust a single lab, so I used 2, blind to each other. Both returned dates that make no sense if we're talking about 19th century fakery. Then the servers were wiped, credentials revoked. We were told to stand down. She swallowed. Efe and Marika were driving to Tbilisi to present our preliminary findings to a 3rd reviewer. They never arrived. Aylin opened the Ottoman notebook with gloved hands. Script flowed across the cream paper like a narrow river. Hakkı Efendi, she said, an Ottoman surveyor, late Hamidian period. His notes are precise, angles, triangulation points, benchmarks, and then this. She turned to a page where beams were sketched in clean lines inside a curving profile, as if the hull of a great structure were drawn from a slice through the earth. A wax seal impression had been pressed onto the margin, a bent war bow. Aylin tapped a line of small letters in the margin, not Ottoman this time. He wrote an acrostic in Hebrew initials. It spells out the dove episodes from Genesis 8, the 3 sendings. She smiled gently, the delight of a correct connection warming her voice. And here, a pencil note in Ottoman Turkish. Seal it until the bow returns in the clouds. I held the brass transit cap again. Inside, the scratches were kissingly shallow, enough to catch a fingertip. 8, 6 to 12. Chapter and verse from Genesis. In that chapter, Noah sends out a raven, then a dove. He waits 7 days. He sends the dove again. It returns with an olive leaf. He waits another 7 days. He sends the dove once more. It does not return. The pattern marks time like a heartbeat. Look at these other numbers, I said. Just here, offset, degrees. I traced the arc, bearing lines from a triangulation cairn. They converge near the Durupınar ridge. Aylin's eyes brightened. He buried a cross-reference in plain sight, scripture to hide angles. I closed the notebook softly. Tell me about the bent bow on the ring, I said to Layla. She sat a little straighter. Salim Karaka. He owns several private security firms and consults for museum recovery teams across borders, always in a lawful grey. A bow is engraved on his signet ring, bent, ready to loose. The same bow is in this wax seal. Someone in 1883 and someone now are linked by an emblem. The phrase bow returns in the clouds. That's Genesis, I said. The rainbow is covenant, God hanging up his war bow after the flood. The Hebrew word for rainbow is the same as for a bow, the kind you string, not a toy, a weapon put to rest. I turned to the listener in my mind, perhaps you. For clarity, I said quietly, the story runs like this. The earth had become violent and ruined, and so the text says God sent a flood to wipe it clean and keep a remnant safe. Noah builds an ark with specific dimensions, sealed in pitch. The waters come, then recede. The ark rests in the mountains of Ararat, that is, ancient Urartu, a region that includes modern eastern Turkey. Noah sends a raven, then 3 doves. The last dove does not return, and soon the earth is dry. A covenant follows, with a bow set in the clouds as a sign that the world won't be drowned like that again. In Mesopotamian stories, Aylin added, her voice soft but sure, Atrahasis and Utnapishtim survive a flood too. The structures of the tale rhyme, but the theology differs. Gilgamesh meets Utnapishtim at the end of the world and learns about a boat, a mountain, and the gods who regret their own storm. She glanced at the Nineveh tablet in its light. History remembers the same kinds of fears in many languages. Geology doesn't show one global flood that covers every mountain, Layla said, practical. But the Near East has seen monumental local floods, enough to birth stories that never forgot. She looked at the wood sliver. And if there's a buried hull-like cavity with beams and an optical mechanism that responds to a bow of light. Admit the light, I finished for her, touching the penciled line in Hakkı's notebook. That's not mystical phrasing. That's instruction. Silence took a seat with us. The rain had softened. In the glass of the window, the museum's courtyard lights smeared into pale coins, the world beyond a pocket of dark. What happens if we fail? I asked. Layla's eyes were steady. Caracas' convoy crosses the Aras River at dawn. The crate disappears. The Ottoman notebook is destroyed or buried. The core with the metallic inclusion vanishes. Efe and Marika are swallowed by a network that leaves no footprints. She exhaled through her nose, measured, controlled. And anyone who speaks is painted as a fantasist chasing a tourist myth. I nodded slowly. And if we succeed? We open what they sealed, Aylin said, her fingers resting on the acrostic as if holding a friend's hand through time. We protect people first. Then we protect the truth itself. The clock on my wrist hummed against the pulse in my veins. 5:30. The hour had a boundary. Good. I like edges. They focus the mind. I gathered the objects into a triangle on the window table. Notebook, brass cap, wood sliver, 3 points to carry into sleep. The central question, I said quietly, is who sealed a mechanical bowlock and a confession inside a buried hull near Ararat, and why are men bearing that same bow, erasing every trace now? To answer, we must ask the one witness who can still speak from 1883. We will visit Hakkı Efendi at his work. Can you reach him? Aylin asked, half a smile forming, unsure whether she had just asked about a phone call to the dead. I can reach the shape of him, I said, the way a surveyor holds a compass, the way a man who means to keep a promise stands in cold wind and writes in clean lines. I breathed once, deep as the museum air would allow. But we must go now. The dawn we race is not patient. Chapter 3. Pipe smoke becomes snow. My rituals are old and simple. They are not magic. They are a bridge I have built plank by plank until it bears my weight without a creak. I dimmed the gallery lamp until the tablet's case was a mild moon. I arranged the objects, oiled notebook, brass cap, bitumen-scented sliver, into a triangle whose angles felt honest. I folded a handkerchief and set it over my eyes like a friendly veil that blocked nothing I needed to see. From an inner pocket I withdrew my pipe, a small, time-polished thing that had learned the measure of my breath. The bowl held my proprietary blend, tobacco for memory, valerian root for calm, poppy seed for the edges of dream, and the smallest careful degree of nightshade, a shadow to quiet the noisy doors of waking. I have mastered the dose and made peace with its power. Panic is a poor tool for a detective. Caution is a better one. I drew in, slow and deliberate, until the ember glowed and the smoke rose thin and blue. I exhaled to the count of the 3 doves of Genesis 8. The first dove goes and returns. Breathe in. The second goes and returns with an olive leaf. Breathe out. The third goes and does not return. The lungs empty and become a humble room, waiting. The museum's rain slipped away by degrees. The clean, recirculated air filled with the mineral breath of high snowfields. The scent of bitumen became the warm tar smell of pitch heated in a small pot. Penelope's sigh stretched out and thinned into wind over stone. My armchair leaned, leather tense under thigh, and then became a saddle, the worn edge pressing into my boot. I opened my eyes. The world was moon-white and wide. The skirts of Ararat lay around me like the ribs of an enormous sleeping beast under snow, and the air was thin, crystalline. Sound carried too far, a dog bark down valley, mule bells chiming hollow and small, a chapel bell in the near dark pealing twice, and then ashamed of its own boldness. My gloved hand rested on brass, a theodolite. At my hip, a roll of linen maps tugged in the cold breeze. The seam of my coat was Ottoman wool, steady and practical. My breath smoked, and I could smell the distant tar of pitch and smoke from an olive oil lamp. I looked down at my hands, Hakkı Efendi's hands, lean, calloused from wood and brass, the nails trimmed to the half moon. The world knew his balance. He stood a surveyor's stand, even on crusted ice. Below, the land sloped to a dark seam cut into the white. Above, the ridge lifted, cut by a wind-scoured gully. The moon made the snow into a map you could read by touch. Footprints, crisp at the edges, led toward a shelf of rock, mine and another's. A hermitage waited beyond that rock, a small building of stone, roof low, window tight. The olive lamplight breathed at its seam like a living thing. On the ridge opposite, far enough to be safe and close enough to worry, a string of torch dots moved with a patrol's practiced spacing. The formation told a story of training. Their leader carried a banner of some kind, cloth dark as the night. When the wind lifted it, the cloth caught a moon scrap, and I saw the emblem stitched there, a bent bow. Selim Karaka's symbol had older blood in it. The line was unbroken, save for a century's dust. I set my palm on the theodolite's cool brass and felt the memory of bearings, of angles scratched in a cap lip with a field knife's tip. 8, 6 to 12. The doves, the bearings. Admit the light. The chapel bell below pealed once, then fell silent. Hakka's boots found the sheep path without thinking. I moved as he would move, not stealthy so much as prudent, boot rolling on the outer edge to grip ice. The moonlight was enough. The stars were a salt scatter, distant and friendly. At the hermitage door, I breathed once, felt the wind still the coat against my ribs, and knocked with the measured confidence of a man who knows why he has come. Inside, the flame breathed. On the ridge, the torches paused, listening, as if the slope itself had whispered a name. I was in place. The world of 1883 was steady beneath my boots. The case had crossed the seam intact. The bow, somewhere beneath this cold skin of earth, was not hung yet, but I would find the lock that wanted light. Father Sarkis, I murmured to the wood, to the stone, to the habit's shadow I knew would be waiting. I am late, but I am here. And the door eased, and warm lamp air met the snow air like two old friends who knew exactly why the other had come. Chapter 4. Torchlines and a bow in the dark. Moonlight lay on the shoulder of Ararat like a thin sheet of beaten tin. The air was so clear it sang in my lungs. Every sound travelled. A dog barked once and then again from a distant hamlet, the notes stepping down the slope like a shepherd descending with his staff. Mule bells rang with a slow, sleepy dignity, and under it all ran the dark, warm scent of pitch. The wind skated over crusted snow and hissed where it met rock. A bell from a small chapel below pealed twice, the sound clean as glass. I looked down, and my gloved hand held a brass theodolite, the kind surveyors used to read angles and bearings before wires and satellites took over the sky. The instrument was heavy, but familiar in Hakkı Efendi's hands, and I knew without thinking how to set its 3 legs firm and true. A rolled linen map sat in the crook of my elbow. The leather strap of a satchel crossed my chest. Hakkı's breath came slow. Mine matched his. Across the near ridge, a string of torches moved with the quiet discipline of men who have marched together before. Torchlight is a language. A weaving line meant a search. A steady file meant transport. These tiny suns lifted and dipped, and even this far I could feel their intent. One torch at the front burned higher and steadier. A banner hung beneath it, a dark cloth soft in the night air, and on that cloth, picked out by the flame's restless tongue, was a bent warbow, the same emblem that, a century and more from this snow, would sit cold and matte on Selim Karaka's ring. Words floated up the slope in Ottoman Turkish, precise and low. Search the gully for the beam void. The consonants clipped the air. The men spread like ink under a brush. They knew where to look. My path and theirs were moving toward the same point. I took one step back behind a boulder and let my body become stone. Panic is a poor tool for a detective, waking or dreaming. I breathed once, twice, and then loosened the satchel's flap. Inside lay a folded sheet of vellum. Its edges had the faint wave of a page that had seen damp and then sun. Sealing a fold at the top was a button of wax, a deep amber brown, sealed with an emblem pressed flat, the bent war bow, precise down to the string notch. The wax had a tiny fissure along one edge where a thumbnail had tested it long ago. I warmed it with my glove, coaxed the edge up, and eased the seal intact from the vellum. The plan was careful and patient, drawn by a surveyor's hand. The lines showed a hull-like cavity under layered soil and stones, a curve of timbers laid side by side like the ribs of a whale, and a void between beam and beam, a beam void large enough for a man to slide within. In the margin, a firm hand in Ottoman script made its case. Seal in the cavity where the blue stone marks the ring. Azrâk tash, blue stone, the note specified, and next to the word a small crosshatch of shading indicated dust, not a block. Under that one line was another in a different ink, as though added after the writer had stood over the place and looked at it with his own eyes. When the third dove does not return, admit the light. The last word had been pressed so hard the ink scratched the vellum. Light. I slipped my fingers past the vellum and found a small brass cap, the protective cap for the theodolite's transit site, the way one might cover a lens. Inside the cap, where polished metal met shadow, someone had scratched numbers. They looked like chapter and verse notes if you wanted them to be, 8, 6 to 12, but they also aligned like bearings. A man could stand on a cairn, lift the instrument, and trust those marks to point him at the Durupınar ridge. When I closed the cap in my palm, I felt a grain of something fine, barely there, like sand. I rubbed my thumb and forefinger together and brought my glove under my nose. A note of stone and something else, something metallic. A few bright grains caught moonlight on the glove's edge. I brushed them into my other gloved hand and then into a small paper fold from the satchel. Blue dust traced a faint halo along the crease. Azrâk, indeed. The blue stole light and then let it go again, the colour that most wanted to be sky. Below, one of the torches angled toward a gully cut into the slope by spring melt. Boots scarred the snow. A man's breath rose as steam, and the torchlight licked the edge of a dark patch in the snow where the wind had scoured to ground. I could hear the man's leather creak. Another torch came to join the first, then another. They were converging on the correct place. Harker's body, which I wore like a coat, had knowledge stored in it. His feet knew paths. His hands knew how to move a heavy instrument without clanking it against stone. I let his memory guide us. Keeping the theodolite tight against my side, I slid backward along a sheep path, the packed earth under the snow firm and narrow. The path angled toward a stand of low shrubs crusted with ice, and past them a line of boulders tumbled down as if a giant had shrugged. The wind shifted. It brought another smell to me, darker than pitch. Earth opened after rain, old wood soaked in resin, a place sealed and resealed. My satchel thumped once against my ribs. I eased a hand against it, feeling the vellum's stiff curve within. A shadow detached itself from a darker shadow below me, and a voice called up, low and even. "Effendi, this way." The syllables were Armenian with Ottoman shape. I knew the voice by its gravity. Father Sarkis. I did not move at once. Below, the torch carriers shouted to each other, and their words bounced between stone and snow. I counted the gap between the calls. 1 breath, 2 breaths. They hadn't seen us. I slid along the line of boulders, found a crease between 2 large stones, and stepped down into a hollow that the wind ignored. There, Behind the rock's shelter, Father Sarkis waited with a small lamp that smelled of olive oil and quiet kitchens. He lifted the hem of his black hooded habit to keep it from the frozen ground. His eyes, large and steady in the shade of the hood, moved once to the rolled map I carried, and he nodded with the softest edge of relief. "You are late," he said. His voice was neither reproach nor complaint. It was statement, like saying the moon was up. He turned. "We cannot speak here. Come." I followed him down a narrow cleft, the colour of slate. The snow thinned in the cleft, and the earth underfoot held the generosity of late autumn rather than the cruelty of full winter. The smell of olive oil brightened as we passed a low opening in stone. By it waited a mule, head low, steam roping from its nostrils. The mule flicked an ear at us and then ignored the world again. It knew this would be a night with gentle steps and long pauses. Over the ridge, torches closed in on the gully. A man called out, "Here," and the wind lifted that word and then laid it down. They had found an opening. The night opened its hands to two places at once, and I had to choose the quieter. I took one more breath of cold and followed the monk's lamp into the gentler dark. Chapter 5, in which a monk offers a dove. The hermitage was a room carved into the slope of the mountain, like a mouth that had decided to speak only rarely. Its doorway was no higher than my chest, forcing me to bow to enter. Bowing suited the place. Inside, the walls were the colour of bread, chalky and pitted with tiny holes where air had nested for a century. The floor was tamped earth, with a path worn by the same 24 steps repeated for years. Door to table, table to hearth, hearth to pallet, pallet to door. A cedar bead rosary lay coiled on a low stone sill like a sleeping snake. The lamp Father Sarkis set on the table painted honey on the wall and a soft tear of light along the edge of a copper cup beside it. He gestured to a bench. I sat. He did not waste words. "The mud broke a year ago," he said. "Late snow, early rain. The slope by the ridge slid like butter on a warm day. The hill opened, and a curve of wood smiled up at us from the earth." He watched my face to see if I understood. I did. The Ark story lives in people's bones in these ranges, no matter which tongue they pray in. "A hull," I said softly, so as to not wake the thin night. He nodded. "A hull. Not the way you see boats on Lake Van, bored side to side. These were timbers, laid like ribs and then joined, and the space between." He spread his hands to show a ring within a ring. We slid into the beam void, as though between the bones of a great beast. We found a chamber, round as a lantern base, and within it a ring that listened to colour. He tilted the lamp's glass as he said colour, and a line of light separated, a faint rainbow smearing onto the wall. A ring within a ring with a narrow throat like the neck of a gourd. In that throat, a plug. We sealed it once before, long ago. Then we sealed it again. "Who sealed it the first time?" I asked. "A brotherhood," he said, the word familiar but not proud. Local men sworn to keep the worst kind of curiosity away. They did not need to know everything. They needed to know enough to keep their hands steady. We used their seal, the bow, so anyone who came later would be afraid to break it or would at least pause. He looked at my satchel. "And you brought their mark with you again?" I showed him the vellum. He did not touch it, but he leaned forward until the wax seal's bow faced him. He smiled, sorrow and approval in one. "There are men out there tonight wearing that bow who know only the fear part," he said. "They have forgotten the pause." I set the vellum on the table and turned the theodolite's brass cap in my hand so the scratched numbers caught lamplight. "And this," I said. He leaned back and considered. "A cap for sight, numbers for a road that is not a road." He reached into the folds of his black habit, and brought out a cloth bundle tied with thin twine. He undid the knot and unfolded the bundle to reveal a small plug of olive wood. The plug smelled faintly of the oil that had preserved it, and darker than that, a thread of tar. On its top was carved a dove, head angled as if about to turn back, body full, wings half open. Around its edge clung a smear of pitch, aged to a leathery gloss. Through the plug's center ran a pinhole, straight and clean. Father Sarkis set it upon the table as one sets a cup for a guest. "This is yours to carry for a time," he said. "When the bow appears on water mist, the plug releases the pin. When the third dove does not return, you admit the light." We pressed the seal when the bow did not appear, to keep others from forcing what should be asked. "How does the pin know when to release?" I asked. I ran a finger near but not over the pinhole's edge. It was tiny, precise. "Does the light fall in, already filtered?" "Not filtered," Sarkis said. "Answered. Light is always itself. It needs mist to show its answer." He stood, crossed the room to the low wall by the door, and bent to lift a flagstone. Beneath it lay a wrapped object. He brought it to the table and unfolded another sheet to reveal a pencil tracing on onion skin paper, the thin, translucent sheets a careful hand uses without wasting anything. The tracing showed timbers in top-down view, a circle where the ring sat, and a collar within that circle where the olive wood plug belonged. A straight line ran across the drawing, marked with small ticks at regular intervals. Along it, someone had written in a clean script the words "Raven, dove, dove plus leaf, dove gone." "The first messenger goes and comes," he said, pointing to the marks with a knuckle. "The second goes and brings peace." He touched the faint penciled leaf. "The third goes and does not return. That is the time." We timed it once by water dripping in a bowl, and again by a candle measured with a charcoal line. The timing makes men remember humility. It makes them wait. I heard voices above the hermitage. The searchers' torches had fanned out. Boots crushed crusted snow. A man laughed, only once, the clipped kind a superior uses to say "move faster" without speaking words. The sound passed over us like a hawk's shadow, shallow and brief. "Show me the place," I said, quietly, as one asks for the salt between friends who have eaten together for many winters. The monk wrapped the plug again and tucked it into a cloth bag inside his habit. He lifted the lamp, cupped his hand around the flame, and nodded toward the door. "We go behind the rocks," he said. "The earth there is open like a wound. We will not make it worse. We will only look." We stepped back into the night. The cold met our faces with a single clean hand. Above, the torches were brighter now, and the men spread across the gully. We went the other way, into a little fold in the land the wind had smoothed with patience. Our steps found old impressions beneath the new snow, memories of feet from a previous winter. The mountain was generous with those who stepped with care. We rounded a boulder and then another. The smell of pitch grew into the air like a slow violin note. Then the slope fell away at my toes, and we were at the edge of a void. Chapter 6. The Beam Void and the Spectrum. From above, the opening looked like a dark oval pressed into the slope, large enough for a man to slip into sideways if he refused to breathe out of fear. The edges were rimmed with frozen soil and stones cemented in ice. But inside, where my lamp and the monk's lamp could not reach, the oval went on, and the air that came from it was not winter air. It was cellar air, with notes of wood long removed from sun and air that had settled into itself. Father Sarkis knelt and set his lamp carefully on a ledge of rock. The light dipped into the oval and came back with a stain of tar on it. "The beam void," he said, almost to the lamp. Between the timbers, the ribs were sealed with pitch. Here the mud took the top layer away. We slid down on our hips, the way a mason slides behind a wall, trusting his belt and his balance. The theodolite stayed in my right hand. With my left, I felt at the edge of the void until my fingers found wood under the crust. It was not fresh wood, nor was it soft. It had the density of something soaked and mineralized, the way driftwood left in a salt marsh takes on the patience of stone. Pitch lined its face with a dull glow that drank our lamps and returned them sober. Above us, feet crunched. A torch paused near the lip of our fold, and orange light ran like water across the stone. We went still. A pebble loosed by a heel above skittered down and ticked the theodolite's brass. I took a slow breath, then a second. Panic would make breath loud. Calm turned breath into the smallest duty. The torch lingered. The bearer shifted weight, maybe looking down, maybe considering the taste of tobacco in his mouth. Then he moved on. His bootsteps receded, absorbed by distance and the open mountain. I slid one gloved finger along the face of the exposed timber. A line interrupted the grain, a ring tighter than the rings around it. The wood of a tree tells its own years in thin bands, each a map of a wet spring or a hard summer. This ring was smooth, not rough. A sheen in it caught the lamp's edge and threw it back in a narrow thread. I brought my eyes level with it and breathed across the ring. On the moist, cold air of my breath, a faint arc woke, the kind a prism draws out of white light when it is given a little mist, a little patience. The arc was the width of my smallest fingernail, and within it the colors lay the way they always do, red easing into orange, orange into yellow, yellow into a green that looked more like sleep than grass, green into a careful blue. At the edge, where blue thinks about becoming violet, the arc met a pinhole in the timber's collar. The hole was not natural, it was bored. I touched that edge with my glove and felt the cold iron kiss of something worked and set, flush with the wood. Metal lived here, not a big piece, a sliver. A question hidden in a tree's own story, cut by a hand that knew more than most hands in this range knew in 1883. Not modern, but imaginations do not obey the dates on coins. Sarkis looked at me the way men look when the same thought has settled on both of them. You see it, Effendi? Yes, I said. It is not just a seal, it is a lock that listens to light. I turned the brass cap over in my palm and looked again at the scratches inside. 8, 6 to 12. Genesis, chapter 8, verses 6 to 12, the timing of the raven and the 3 doves. But these numbers could also be degrees, compass bearings between known stones in this winter. The ancient story and the ground under my boots agreed on a language. "They're men," Sarkis said, meaning the torches, meaning the bow sigil that no longer remembered the pause. "We'll pull at it like a bolt and break it." "They may try," I said, "but if the pin holds, they will waste time, and time is a tool we can use." I slid my hand farther into the void and let my fingers find the face of the circular collar in the wood, the place where a plug would sit. The olive wood plug from the monk's cloth would fit here, the way a key fits a lock when the bronze remembers the cut of the iron that made it. The wind lifted again. A heavier collection of steps approached from the far side of the gully, and a voice carried sharp and flat, an officer assessing, culling panic from a group without raising the temperature. I thought of Selim Karaka a century later, standing straight at the edge of a hangar, hands behind his back and ring cold on his finger. Power likes simple shapes. "Once," the monk said behind me, "when the mud first slid, we brought a kettle. We let water boil and become mist. The bow came as if called. The plug spoke. The pin lifted. He made a small sound with his tongue against his teeth, like a latch easing. We resealed 3 days later, when the ground was harder. We swore an oath. We did not speak the words of that oath at the church, because this is older than any of our buildings. We spoke it to the face of the mountain. And what did you see inside, Father? I asked. It was a question I already knew the answer to. In 2027, 2 junior researchers would vanish near Kars. A tube would move inside a crate. But I wanted the truth from his memory. We saw writing, he said. Fine, not on paper. On a thin plate of metal like a mirror where someone had scratched a story too small for ordinary eyes. And we saw a photograph, the kind that needs light and then darkness and then light again to be believed. The picture was of this place, of the ribs, of the collar. He paused and breathed. We feared what greedy men would do. We sealed it. Haku wrote what he could bear to write in his book and left the rest to the snow. I held the brass cap to the lamp's edge and aligned the scratched numbers with the notch that would fit over the theodolite's sight. The cap would shape a beam. That beam would meet mist. Mist would make a bow. And a bow would teach a plug to let a pin go home and take its slender secret with it. Come, I said. We need a place to think. The torches were too near. Good thinking prefers a ledge, a little wind, and enough distance to turn fear into a plan. We slid out of the beam void as carefully as we had entered. I brushed the ring's face with the back of my glove, leaving no oils, no human haste. Behind us, the dark oval remembered our presence by changing nothing at all. Chapter 7, in which doves become numbers, and numbers become light. The ledge we chose was not far from the hermitage, but it felt like a different room in the same house, the kind of house mountains build with slopes for walls and a sky for a ceiling. A shoulder of rock blocked any straight line of sight from the gully. A clump of low shrubs bent over us like men who had learned from wind to keep their heads together. The world narrowed to what fit between us and the horizon. That was enough. I set the theodolite and its tripod. The brass felt warmer in my hands for being held, and my fingers read its dials like old friends. For those who have never used one, a theodolite is a precision instrument that measures angles. You set it level. You look through a small sight. You read off degrees on a ring. Before lithium batteries and lasers, this is how men put a railroad where it needed to go. It is a gentle tool. It makes men kneel so they can see properly. On the ground beside it, I spread the vellum plan so the edges faced the wind and would not lift. The wax seal with the warbow sat to the side like a watchful eye. I placed the small brass cap near the theodolite, scratched numbers up. Father Sarkis laid the onion skin tracing down with flat palms so the tracing wouldn't breathe too much. He unwrapped the olive wood plug and rested it between us. The carved dove looked both backward and forward at once, a simple bird made meaningful by its timing. Speak what you see, I said, the way I do when a case asks not for drama, but for inventory. The notebook, I began, eyes on the vellum, says, seal in the cavity where the blue stone marks the ring. We saw blue dust on the timber, azrâk, and a ring that is smooth, with a tiny bore. Therefore, that ring was worked. It holds a mechanism aligned with the grain. Because the ring is smooth, and because a sheen appears on mist, the mechanism answers to light, not to a push or a pull. I touched the olive plug. The plug has a pinhole. The plug is stained with pitch around its edge. Therefore, the plug sits in a collar that must be sealed to remain tight against air and water. The pinhole reads light. When the correct spectrum, the bow, falls across it, a spring or weight releases pressure, the pin lifts, the collar loosens, the lock opens. I let the words be plain. Listeners fall asleep more easily when logic walks at a steady pace. Time, Father Sarkis said, pointing to the penciled marks labelled raven, dove, dove plus leaf, dove gone. We waited. Once you start sending birds, you must count between sendings to know it is the same story. Genesis chapter 8, I said, verse 6 to 12. After 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark and sent out a raven. It went back and forth. Then he sent a dove, which returned because it found nowhere to rest. He waited 7 days, sent the dove again. It came back with a freshly plucked olive leaf. He waited 7 more days, sent the dove a 3rd time, and it did not return. This sequence, in that text, is a rhythm of patience and confirmation. I turned the brass cap so the scratches read 8, 6 to 12. Someone encoded this rhythm twice, once in scripture numbers and once in degrees. I seated the cap on the theodolite site. The scratch marks aligned with notches, not exact but suggestive, as if a man had made them with a blade tip while the instrument was still. I then looked through the sight. The rim pressed gently against my brow. I panned the instrument until the line of sight slid to the dark ridge that hid Durupınar from night's eye. The notches matched that direction well enough for a man to walk, even in winter. The bearings are the ridge, I said. Light needs mist, Sarkis added. You must make mist. Yes, I said. You made mist with a kettle. In my time, we can do it cleanly with a portable humidifier, a pump quiet enough that a child sleeping in the next room will not turn in her bed. We will need a lamp that throws a full spectrum, not a narrow band, and a way to carry that beam as one carries water in a flume. The brass cap is a flume for light. The wedge of metal in the growth ring is the responder. It will not yield to force. It will yield to the one thing it was made to hear. I sat back on my heels. Snow whispered down the slope far off, the sound of small crystals settling. I gathered the pieces together in my mind and spoke the case aloud for the listener resting at home, because repetition is medicine for a tired brain. Here is what we have, I said in plain English. A hidden hull cavity above the Durupınar ridge, a ring within a ring inside it, a collar in wood that holds an olive wood plug. That plug has a pinhole. The ring in the wood is smoother than nature would make it and responds to a certain band of light that appears when white light meets fine mist. That band is the bow of a rainbow. The old notes say, when the 3rd dove does not return, admit the light. In 1883, Hakkı Efendi and Father Sarkis, men who understood duty, resealed the place using a wax emblem of a war bow to frighten away thieves and to remind themselves that the pause mattered. In my present, 2027, a deep core sample taken from this place showed a mineralized timber with a small metallic inclusion precisely within one growth ring. The date returned by carbon reading was older than it should be. The labs were wiped. The core was stolen. 2 junior researchers vanished on their way to a conference. A convoy under Selim Karaka is due to cross the Aras River at dawn with a sealed crate. I let the cold air move across my face. Karaka's ring carries the same bow. The same network that once sequestered knowledge has decided it belongs to nobody at all. They will destroy what they cannot own. They will move what they choose and erase the rest. I turned my hand palm up, fingers relaxed. So, we must open the bow lock before the convoy moves. We will do it in their sight, with their emblem, in a way that lets them keep their pride and gives us back our people and our truth. How do you make men like that say yes? Sarkis asked. The question was not doubt. It was another kind of inventory. You let them keep a story they can tell themselves, I said. That they supervised, that they did not fail. You point the light, you lift the pin. You do not lift a weapon, and you give the world a version of the truth that names no names and burns no bridges. You send a dove once, twice, and then, When the third does not return, you open the window. The monk's mouth softened. He wrapped the olive wood plug and returned it to my hands. Then go, he said. This mountain keeps its own time. Your dawn is a different clock. Take the plug, the cap, and the tracing. Leave me the vellum. If I must, I will eat it. He smiled a thin smile at that. It transformed his face into the face of a boy who had once traded a clever stone for another boy's best apple. A man who has eaten a map cannot betray it. I stood. The theodolite folded into itself with the small clicks of a violin ready for its case. I closed the clipped legs, slung the strap across my shoulder, and felt the instrument's weight settle like a friendly hand. I set the brass cap in my pocket, the plug in my jacket next to my heart, where its warmth would keep the old pitch from snapping at the cold. I rolled the onion skin tracing and slid it into a sleeve. The night had become thinner. The stars near the horizon let go of their fierce point and became domes. A little greying touched the eastern edge of the sky. "Father," I said, "thank you." He lifted his hand with the cedar bead rosary wound around his wrist and blessed me without drama. "You will return," he said. "This is work that returns men to where they began. Go." I turned, and the mountain turned with me, which is another way of saying the world cooperated. The wind softened, the snow underfoot held. I walked out of 1883 with the old cap and the older plug, and I let the dream carry me forward like the last length of rope paid out from a boat settling into its berth. Chapter 8, in which we hang the bow before dawn. The quiet of the mountain became the quiet of a room where a map lay open under a single shaded lamp. The pitch scent of the beam void became the clean odor of rain at my window, a thread of coffee from a cup now gone cool, and the faint animal warmth of Penelope breathing in her sleep on the rug. I do certain things in one world, and I find my hands doing their echoes in the other, without asking me if it is time. I set the brass cap on the table beside the Ottoman notebook. The olive wood plug, wrapped in its cloth, went into a padded pouch. The onion skin tracing slid into a clear sleeve. My hands were steady. Voices in the hall were low. Layla stood by the window, a phone dark in her palm, watching snow hit the city light and vanish. Her cheeks still held the wind. Aylin had spread a street map of cars and a satellite photo of a certain industrial district. Blocky roofs, a perimeter fence, a rectangle of concrete broad and clean where convoy trucks liked to form lines. A hangar sat at the far edge, its roof a shell of corrugated steel with skylights like fish scales. "Say again?" Layla asked, her tone careful and even as one speaks in a hospital corridor at 3 a.m. "We open it with the bell," I said. "Your two colleagues may be in that building or the next. The crate is there. The seal is not merely a circle in wax. It is a mechanism, old but smart. It will answer a rainbow if we give it mist and a clean beam. We will bring the beam, the mist, and the key." Aylin smiled a small, sharp smile. Her round tortoiseshell glasses had slid down her nose. She pushed them up with one knuckle. "I can get 2 portable humidifiers," she said. "Hospital grade, quiet, battery packs." Her hands hovered over the map and then began to draw in the air, measuring the space as if it were a page. "A light? What kind?" "Broad spectrum, continuous," I said. "A lamp used for product photography will do. We want as much of the visible spectrum as we can, not a narrow red or blue, but daylight in a patient stream. We'll focus it with this." I tapped the brass transit cap. "Think of it as a tiny flume for light. We will mount it onto a simple tube with blackened interior to keep the beam clean. A white canvas behind the crate will show us the arc so we can place it exactly." Layla nodded, already in logistics mode. "Power?" Battery packs, Aylin said again, counting on her fingers. I can borrow a pair from a media lab at the university. They trust me with boxes because I return them cleaner than I found them. She ducked her head, a habit that had saved her from many small storms. Timing, I said. We are chasing a convoy scheduled for 5:30 departure. We will be there at 4:30. We will set up along the east wall where the roof windows will carry the first thin light. Cold air will help us. Dew point sits close now, and the misters will make their own haze without becoming a cloud. At 5, we align the beam. The arc will appear where physics says it must. We lay it over the seal. The olive plug meets the collar. A pin releases. The latches ease. And if they do not let us near the crate, Layla asked. No panic, only the important question, clean on the table. We offer a trade, I said. Not prisoners for truth, but discretion for dignity. I do not threaten men like Karaka with exposure. I give them a future story worth telling, that he presided over a proper opening and secured the site from amateurs. He can live with that. He can call it stewardship. Aylin's fingers had moved from the paper map to her laptop keyboard. Her eyes flicked left and right as she typed, an archivist's rhythm applied to a different kind of page. I will prepare a timed release, she said. High-resolution scans of the notebook pages, my transcription and translation of the acrostic of the doves, and 2 pages of context that explain the mechanism without naming living operatives. The list goes to 4 journalists who can be trusted to choose slowness over sensation. The release will fire at 5:35 unless I cancel with a phrase from you. She looked up over her glasses. What phrase? The bow is hung, I said. The old stories promise. It tells them that a weapon is put away. It tells us that the lock has answered to its name. Layla pulled her field jacket tighter and looked again at the satellite image. Selim knows me, she said. He respects work done well. He will let you do this if he can call it his idea later. If he refuses, he will refuse with style. She paused. Do we bring anyone else? No, I said. No crowds, no backup that looks like backup. Backups are arguments. We will take a small cart for the equipment, a rolling toolbox, so we look like the kind of people who tighten bolts and wipe our fingerprints because we like clean metal. We dress the part. Field jacket, archivist cardigan, a tweed jacket that old museums still trust, even when they have no reason to. I touched my tie and smiled with my mouth closed. We will be the calmest thing in that room. Calm is a key like any other. Aylin printed the map and slid it into a document sleeve. She tucked cotton gloves in her cardigan pocket, habit without superstition. I'll ride ahead, she said. There is a service road by the old rail spur. The main gate will be watched, but the east fence has a gap where a tree leans in. It makes a shadow in the corner of the camera's eye. I have walked past that camera before with a stack of boxes and my head down. Men with earpieces do not stop the woman with the paper. Text when you're through, Layla said. No heroics. No heroics, Aylin echoed. She closed her laptop, slid it into her bag, and paused with her hand on the zipper. Efe and Marika, where will they be? In a side room, I said, under a tarp over crates that look like hardware. They will be hungry and embarrassed by how much they want water. They will want to be brave in front of Karaka's men. We will let them be brave in soft ways, by holding out cups steady, by not making jokes about heroes. The clock on the wall showed 2:57. The rain at the window had become a thin sleet that made the streetlights stand in halos. Penelope lifted her head and then let it fall again, reassured by the tone of my voice. I turned the brass cap in my fingers, then set it onto a small length of black tubing I had cut once to make a different case behave. It fit with a satisfying friction. I taped it in place with matte cloth tape. I lined the tube with black felt to absorb stray light. The beam would not wander. It would go where we asked it to go. The felt made a soft whisper as my finger ran along it. I laid the olive wood plug on a square of white cloth. Its carved dove was simple, almost childlike, but the hand that had made it knew the weight of oaths. I lifted it and found with my fingertip the clean edge of the pinhole. I did not push. I learned its diameter by the way air moved through it when I breathed, the smallest kiss of stirring. I set it down again and rapped it twice. Layla looked at me, at the plug, at the cap, and then at the map of cars again. She smiled, not with teeth, but with gratitude. "You will be our calm, Snorelock," she said. "I'll be your wheels." "And I," Aelin added, head tilted the way birds do when they know where water is, "will be your clock." We gathered our things with minimal sound. The night outside had a soft structure, the way a good paragraph has lines that carry you forward without you seeing the work that holds them straight. I turned off the lamp. The room dimmed to the hour's natural grey. We moved to the door. I put my hand on the frame and listened. The building settled like an old man satisfied with his pillow. The rain signed its small signature on the sill. In my jacket, the olive wood plug rested warm against me, like a tiny, obedient heart. We stepped into the corridor and then into the stairwell, our feet finding the steps without looking. A slept city let us pass. The car waited with its engine quiet. The wipers made a low music on the windscreen. The roads were black ribbon with a wet shine. I felt the ticking clock, not as a panic maker, but as a metronome, the kind an old piano teacher rests on the lid, not to hurt you, but to guide your hands so the music can come out of them without shaking. "Dawn moves toward the Aras," I said, buckling my belt as Layla turned the key and the engine came up like a throat clearing in a library. "We'll be there before it draws its first clear breath." Aelin's phone made a tiny sound, a sparrow of a note. One of the journalists says received and adds a prayer hands emoji and the word courage. I reply with a dove. That's all. She slid the phone into her pocket, and her other hand touched the sleeve with the map. She said nothing else. She didn't need to. We drove, and the city widened into a plain. The hangar waited where men had taught themselves to leave the ground. We would not leave it. We would stay on the floor, keep our anger low and our light clean, and hang the bow not in clouds, but in a room built of steel and spines. The plan had no heroics and no sharp edges. It had one lamp, 2 misters, a white canvas, a black tube lined with felt, a brass cap with old scratches, an olive wood plug that knew when to let go, a phrase ready to release a story if needed, and 3 people moving like one mind. I watched the sleet thin and the eastern sky think about color, and I rested my hand on the pouch at my chest. Inside, the carved dove waited. That was enough for now. The next act would require our hands. This act required only readiness and breath. Chapter 9, in which mist and light turn a lock. The hangar outside cars breathed frost. Steel ribs arched like a silent ship, and the concrete floor held the night's cold the way a glacier holds time. I moved with Layla and Aelin at my shoulders, and each step echoed just once, then fell away. The hour was 4:47. A convoy slept in 2 rows, flatbeds with canvas covers, a fuel truck, and a matte grey SUV whose engine ticked in tiny cool-down clicks. Selim Karaka stood near the center, hands folded behind his back. His signet ring, the bent war bow, drank the light instead of giving it. A crate waited at his feet. It was not crude. It was a craftsman's box, seasoned planks bound with iron straps, corners dovetailed with care, and a seal on the lid carved with a bow drawn but unstrung. "Mr. Holmes," he said, tone even, not unkind. "You walked into my clock and moved the hands." I kept my voice low. I came to stop them from breaking. We both dislike a mess. Guards in dark coats watched without fidgeting. Their stillness told me they were trained well and paid on time. Aylin stayed near a column, phone tucked in a knit glove, her eyes steady behind round glasses. Layla's jaw was set, but when she exhaled, it was silent. Everyone had practiced their calm. "I ask 2 things," I said, "and let the request be a bridge, not a shove. We open it properly, and no one gets hurt." Karaka looked at the crate, then at the lamp in my hand, then at the polished mouth of the brass transit cap cradled in my palm. "Properly," he said, an interesting word for a story people argue about. "In 1883, I replied, "Hakkı Effendi made a choice beneath these same mountains. He sealed what he found with a bowlock that only light could speak to. Let us answer in the same language." A thin breath of air slipped through broken glazing high above. Frost feathered the glass in shallow ferns. The hangar smelled of diesel, old tires, and very faintly, pitch, the same mineral sweetness that clung to the sliver of wood Dr. Erdem had brought me. I set 2 compact misters on the floor at either end of the crate. Their tanks were filled with clean water. I clicked them on. A soft whir began, like a cat purring in the next room. Mist made a gauze that moved in simple lines. No drama, just a veil on cold air. I raised the photography lamp and clipped the brass cap to its front, turning that old transit mouth into a precise aperture. The beam narrowed and warmed. I angled it up to the frost-rimmed window so the light struck, bent, and returned. The room did what rooms must do when you ask them correctly. A spectrum stepped out of white and walked down the mist. A rainbow grew, not broad, not loud, just a clean arc. 7 clear bands laid across the crate's seal. Red brushed iron, violet settled into an engraved groove. The carved bow, once a symbol, now a switch, wore its own promise. I lifted the olive wood plug Father Sarkis had guarded for a lifetime, its dove carved simple and true. The plug's pinhole caught the purple end of the arc, and the wood hummed under my fingers with a faint, sympathetic tremor, the way a violin replies when you find its note. I set it into the waiting socket on the seal. A tick, soft as a bead tapping glass. A pin withdrew. Somewhere inside, a spring gave up its tension with a sigh it had waited a century to release. I kept breathing the way a diver does when the surface is still far, and the lungs are steady, long in, longer out. Karaka stepped closer. His guards didn't move. He didn't need to tell them not to. Authority, when real, doesn't shout. I lifted the latches one by one. Iron tongues lifted from their beds without protest. The lid eased up on hidden hinges, and cool air rose from a cavity that had forgotten the world's smells. Inside lay a second box, smaller, with carpentered corners, bound in linen bandage to keep the wood from splitting in the dry. "Continue," Karaka said, as if granting permission to a surgeon opening a chest. The inner box lifted free with a sound like the last whisper of a prayer. Under it, a lead-lined tube rested in a cradle. The tube's cap bore the same bow seal, now unlocked. I eased it open. The first thing out was a sheaf of paper so carefully written it felt like a road. Hakkı Effendi's hand, bold and patient, in Ottoman Turkish. The confession was not a crime story. It was an account, how a mudslide revealed a beam void, how he and a monk sealed a chamber with a light-responsive pin, how he pressed a bow into wax to tell the future which lever to pull. He wrote why. Because there are men who think a covenant is a threat they can aim. Beneath the papers, wrapped in oiled cloth, rested a thin sheet of metal. It was not crude. It caught light like a shallow lake. Under the lamp, Micro-etched script rose in tight, ordered rows, letters no wider than a hair. The alloy was not pure silver or nickel alone. It was layered. A 19th century mind had found a way to write for the damp and the dark. Last, under a piece of black velvet, a glass negative waited, the beam void captured in its moment of exposure. I held it to the misted light and saw what Hacker saw, the curve of a hull under earth, growth rings stacking like quiet years, and glinting within one ring, a sliver of machined metal that had no business living inside a tree. A ripple of motion at the edge of the hangar. A tarpaulin rustled. 2 figures stepped out, hands empty, blinking in the spectrum's soft bands. Efe and Marika. They were not bound, just managed. The relief on Layla's mouth stayed silent, but it was tidal. She moved to them, checked pupils, checked hands, counted breaths, and wrapped them in blankets from a crate that was conveniently emergency supplies. Karaka watched me, not them. You proposed to walk out with those papers and those children, and my reputation intact. That is a rich offer. No, I said. I propose you preside over the proper opening and be remembered for restraint. There will be a story. You can shape its spine by letting the facts stand rather than cracking them in half. I tilted my head toward Aylin. We scheduled a timed release at 5:35 to several desks who do not drink rumor. They will receive scans, a translation, and the mechanism. No names, no operatives, only history and how to protect it. One phrase cancels the blast and replaces it with a measured beam. The phrase is, "The bow is hung." Karaka didn't blink, but something in his shoulder dropped a millimeter, a tiny exhale of calculation. He glanced at the ring on his hand, thumb brushing the bent bow. What if I say no? What if I load this crate and take your neat toys and ask my men to escort you quietly out of my city? Then you will spend months killing rumors that smell like truth, I said. And the first time a guard speaks to a cousin, the second time a picture leaks, your control shifts from your hand to the current. You do not like currents. You like plans. I kept my palms open. Let this one stand. He looked at Layla, who was nodding with a doctor's promise not to invent, only to record. He looked at Aylin, who was still and small and unafraid, the way librarians become when a book in danger sits on the table. He looked at Efe and Marika, 2 young faces that would haunt a careful man more than any headline. "Say your phrase," he said. I gave Aylin a single nod. She lifted the phone, and in a whisper that felt like laying a tool in its drawer, she spoke. The bow is hung. Her thumb moved. The countdown app dissolved. In its place, a set of messages went out to a short list of editors and curators. A curated summary with images, no identifying marks that would lead to men with guns, and clear instructions for conservation and independent verification. Karaka's eyes tracked the light on the mist again. He made a small gesture, 2 fingers down. Every shoulder in the room eased by a degree. Holsters stayed shut. One guard even looked up, as if surprised by the colors. "Close it," he said. "Seal it in the way it can be sealed and yet known. Then you will leave with your witnesses and your papers. The site," he added, a faint edge returning, "will not be trampled by fools looking for wood they can sell on television." "We agree," I said. "No crowds, only quiet hands." I turned off the lamp. The rainbow faded like a good memory. The mist thinned and lay down as water on the concrete. I pressed the bow seal back into place without the pin engaged, so the crate was held by its latches only, closed but not trapped. The olive wood plug I slid into Layla's pocket. "For the archives," I said. She pressed her hand over it as if it were warm. We gathered the lead tube, Harker's confession, the etched plate, and the negative into Aylin's carrying case, lined with foam and wrapped in the same quiet discipline that saves books from fire and gossip. Karaka stood by without moving to stop us. His eyes found mine one last time. "Mr. Holmes," he said, not a question. "Yes, Mr. Karaka. The bow should not be drawn for small things." "It never should have been drawn for big ones either," I said. "Not in this story." He almost smiled. "Get them warm." We left the hangar the way we came in, on quiet feet, under a sky that was still undecided. Chapter 10, in which dawn resolves the ledger. Outside, the plateau met the horizon with a clear line, and the first colour arrived like someone slowly opening a door. Peach, then pearl. The convoy, once a ready fist, uncurled. Engines stayed off. A driver in a knit cap rubbed his hands together and looked toward the hills as if they and he had an understanding. The Aras River lay somewhere beyond that edge, an intent that would not be met today. We moved to a plain van that Layla had borrowed from a friend who believed in the boring heroism of paperwork. Inside, the air warmed steadily. Efe cupped his hands around a paper cup and watched steam that wasn't mist at all. Marika leaned back against a folded jacket and closed her eyes, then opened them again when I touched her shoulder to keep her from sleeping before a medic could check her. "Almost," I said. "Warm first, then rest." Aylin sat on a crate with her case on her knees. She worked in slow motions, cotton gloves, acid-free sleeves, tablet camera balanced on a stack of field notebooks. She photographed Hakka's confession, each page, each line, then the etched metal plate, taking the light at a shallow rake to catch the tiny letters. "Whoever did this," she murmured, "knew moisture ruins ink and moths love glue. Metal makes a stubborn memory." "What does the text say?" Layla asked, voice low. "Some of it is technical," said Aylin. "Bearings, names of ridges, marks to find a triangulation cairn, and this." She paused to read. "A note to those who would open it. Remember the birds. The raven is patience. The first dove is hope. The second is peace. And the third is departure. Do not hurry a lock that keeps men from using a promise as a weapon." Layla exhaled through her nose, the way people do when they come home to a truth they wanted to be there before they knew it was. Outside, a flatbed driver opened a thermos and poured coffee for a guard who had left a roadside argument somewhere far behind in a past life. The guard took it with a nod. Nothing in the body language of that simple exchange held threat. I dialed my breathing to match the small work at hand. 4 counts in, 6 out. I scanned the hangar's windows from the van's mirror and saw only reflections and frost. Karaka and his men were silhouettes now, absorbed by the building that had decided it would rather be a barn than a barracks. In a world full of noise, not making a scene is an art. We drove a short way to a clinic that smelled of antiseptic and boiled water. A nurse with a wool scarf checked Aoife's pupils and reflexes, measured Marika's pulse, and wrote neat notes in a form that had no column for "opened a 19th century light lock," which was an advantage. Layla stood back while still being near, the practiced dance of a leader who lets others work and still keeps responsibility. Karaka did not follow. He did not need to. He had already made his calculation and would play the long game. He would call someone in a ministry he trusted and advise a perimeter of quiet watchfulness around Durupınar. He would tell a journalist he knew respected silence to expect something verified and sober. He would turn a hard thing into a contained thing. That was his way. Aylin closed her case when every page was imaged and every surface protected. She slid the olive wood plug into a padded pocket, then paused, eyes softening. "Imagine the person who carved this," she said, thinking not about news, but about the day someone might be ready again for a simple mechanism that tells a better story. "A rainbow as a lock," said Layla. "A bow hung up to say, 'Not today.'" She looked at me. I didn't think this would end without yelling. "Noise is a choice," I said. "We chose instruments instead." The sun lifted its shoulder above the earth's rim. Snowfields on distant slopes went from ash to milk to gold in a careful gradient. The color touched the fan of stone that backed the Durupınar ridge, and in that light, hills didn't argue with their names. They were simply what they were. As the van's heater calmed to a warm hush, I felt the moment begin to loosen its hold on the muscles of my back and hands. That is always the sign for me. Solve the core, and the world lets my body remember it is a body. I leaned my head against the cool glass and watched a bird rise on a thermal that hadn't noticed how early it was. I closed my eyes. Wind over snow turned into rain on my window at home. The seat beneath me relaxed into the familiar cushion of my old chair. The smell of diesel and pitch relaxed into leather and paper, and the clean smoke of my pipe cooling in its tray. Penelope stirred, shifted her weight from one paw to the other on the braided rug, and decided I had not really moved. She sighed and returned to the work of sleeping. When I opened my eyes, the desk held the three objects exactly where I had left them before the dream went to work. The Ottoman notebook wrapped in oiled cloth, the sliver of pitch-scented wood in its sleeve, the brass transit cap. I lifted the cap and turned it in my hand. The scratched numbers inside, 8, 6 to 12, were both chapter and bearing, verse and azimuth. I set the cap on the penciled outline of the ridge I had drawn last night and aligned the mark. It pointed where it should. The notebook's wax seal with its bent bow had lost none of its authority. The acrostic of the dove lines Aylin had found, 3 clear steps across the margin, read now like an instruction manual for patience. Send, wait, send, wait, send, then trust the absence. The room held a ghost of bitumen, the polite persistence of things that matter. Outside, the city had begun to breathe different, softer. Tires whispered on wet streets. Someone laughed and then apologized to the cold air for being loud before sunrise. Inside, the only ticking came from a clock I had wound yesterday. I placed my hand flat on the notebook for a moment, the way one does at the end of a prayer, and let the warmth rest there. The case was not a legend argued in a noisy room anymore. It was a set of pages, a plate, a photograph, and 2 young scientists drinking hot tea under a nurse's eye. It was enough. Penelope opened one eye and sent me a look that meant, in her old Beagle language, "If you are done touching papers, you may return to the work of keeping still." I agreed. The rain came and went in thin lines, a kind of music for people who prefer the kind that doesn't ask for applause. The lamp's shade held a pool of amber that did not try to spill. The room had corners again, dark where corners should be, soft where softness is useful. Your work, dear listener, is not to hold anything up now. I have it. I will hold it for both of us. Hear the gentle tap of water on metal somewhere beyond the window, like a ladle finding the edge of a pail. Hear the low crackle of a hearth ember that thinks about waking, then decides sleep is wiser. Far off, a mule bell rings once, and someone hushes it with a hand, and the bell agrees. A breeze walks through cedar boughs and touches every needle in the same slow order. Let your breath join simple things. 4 counts in, like opening a door and letting fresh air in. 6 counts out, like laying a tool down exactly where it belongs. Again and again. If your mind brings back the rainbow, let it. It is only a bar of light moving across mist. It does not demand, it does not accuse. It just shows how white holds color and then lets it go. If your shoulders carry any stone from today, set it down. Not on the floor, not on your back, but on a shelf in a safe room where I keep such stones for later. I will catalogue them. I am very good at that. You are allowed to be poor at it tonight. You do not need to watch the door. I am sitting in the chair near it, and I am very good at not sleeping when sleep would let the wrong thing in. Think of the 3 doves we learned from as 3 easy breaths. The first goes out and returns. You feel your chest lift and fall, and you learn that air will come back. The second returns with a small leaf, maybe a warm toe or the weight of a blanket on your ankles, a sign that the room is friendly. The third does not return because it no longer needs to. That is the breath that does not ask for proof. It simply goes and keeps the promise. Your lungs know how. All the sharp things of this night have been put down. The convoy is not moving. The crate is not being smuggled. A careful man decided that quiet was better than force, and a careful woman turned a countdown into a letter. The bow is hung. The bow is hung. Now the room will do the rest for you. Chairs do not care if you snore. Blankets do not take notes if you mumble. The clock will keep time without reminding you of it. Outside, the rain will talk to the roof in a language they share and do not require you to learn. The floor will hold you up as if it was built for that purpose yesterday, which, to your bones, is exactly true. Close your eyes if they are not already closed. Feel the edges soften. Let the words step back. Let the pictures stay if they are small and kind. If a sharper one intrudes, I will escort it out. That is my work and my pleasure. You are allowed to be someone who sleeps while history shifts its weight. You are not needed at the door tonight. The mountain under its snow is breathing without hurry. The ridges that carry Durupınar lie in the same places they lay for Hakkı Efendi, and the light that unlocked his seal will return tomorrow and the day after, whether or not anyone asks it to do tricks. The covenant in that old story was for all creatures, which includes you, your pillow, the walls, the stray cat 2 courtyards over, and the cup cooling on a windowsill. It is a big promise. It can hold your small ones. Sleep now. If you hear rain, that is only the sky setting down its tools for the night. If you hear a clock, that is only the world remembering the count of gentle things. The bow is hung. Good night.